Then you're most welcome to our monthly session. Today is a special day. We have a scientist from all angles giving us a talk on STEM education, how to conceptualize it in our local communities. I want to start with a brief introduction of our speaker today, and we take it up from there. Good. So Tom is his full name is actually a neuroscientist, science communicator, and a founder of GH Scientific, an organization that is focused on building capacity in STEM education through public engagement and outreach activities. Tom holds a PhD in physiology and with a current research focus on learning and memory, which he carries out at the University of Ghana, Legon. Tom has multiple publications to his credit in peer-review journals and has presented various aspects of his work locally and in international conferences. Tom has also had his work including CNN and BBC. Tom sits on a number of boards. For example, he sits on the African Regional Committee of the International Brain Research Organization, helping their contributions to neuroscience in Africa. He is also the regional president of the Ghana Science Association and chairs the Ghana Young Academy also. Tom has a strong passion for collaboration and is responsible for implementing multiple public engagement projects, such as which earned him an award by the British Council for Social Impact in 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you this very resourceful scientist to take us through our session today. Tom, you are most welcome. Please take it up from there.
All right. Thank you very much. So I do have a slide I wanted to share. It'd be great if you can all confirm for me that you can see my screen, please.
Yeah, we can see it.
It is on.
Okay, great. So thank you, Ima, for that introduction. Thankfully, he's done all of that, so I'm able to say very little about myself. But what I wanted us to do for our time together this evening is really to take the practice and the idea of STEM education, and then we try and contextualize it to see what it will look like if we really put it in a community context. We really have the community centralized in how we approach STEM education. Now, with the work you're all involved in, I know when it comes to community work, you all have a great sense of it. So we'll try and flip a few things around and really give you some thoughts and ideas to think about. And before the time is up, I'd really open it up for, some questions so we can all have a conversation and a shared learning experience. So, as has been said, I'm co-founder at GH Scientific, right? And I do a lot of science communication work. And even now, my research is straying a little bit into that as trying to look at the sort of like processes that underlie learning and memory all together. But when we take the science communication, which are the heart of what myself and the team do at GH Scientific, It's normally, or the best of like definition that has been given, is that is a practice of, informing, educating, and sharing wonderment and raising awareness of science-related topics. Now, you can see at the heart of this is educating, which means, there isn't that much of a gap, right, between STEM education and science communication, because a component of it is, of course, educating people. The key difference that one may then try and throw in is the idea that, well, when you carry out science communication activities and you engage people in a very informal way, nobody is sitting a test at the end of your session. You are not saying, if you don't, complete this exit ticket, you cannot leave this place you freely entered of your own volition, right? So there is that component. There is no testing at the end of the day. But I wanted to focus on the educating part of it. And what I'm going to do for the next 15 minutes or so is to give you a snapshot of what we have been doing educating wise, and then share with you some of the lessons that we've learned from it, which has gone on to feed into other activities and, has led me to the point now of, thinking about a more holistic approach to community engagement as far as STEM education is concerned. So here's how the hour or so we have together is going to go. I'm going to spend some time focusing on our work around educating as a part of science communication, right? And then share the lessons that we've learned through all of it. And then we'll do questions right at the end. Like I said, I'd want us to have a very conversational element to this. So let's start from primary school session. Back early on when we started GH Scientific, one of the key things that we wanted to do was to find, alternative means to connect people with STEM in as many ways as possible. And one of the ways was this project we ran called a science book tour. It was really targeted at the primary school students. And what it was we also had a library, took a playbook out of EduSpots, took a page out of EduSpots playbook, right? We also had a library. This was a shared library between 3 schools. However, these 3 schools were cut across 2 regions. And we split up the books along thematic areas. There were some books that were focused on activities, some were focused on the biological sciences, and then others were focused on the physical sciences. We spread them, we moved it around, and we combined this with termly engagements to do activities and also to engage with scientists. Okay, now, we ran this activity, or we ran this project for about 2 years. And what I want to share with you is the lessons that we learned from it, all right? The first one was, it doesn't take much to excite young students when it comes to STEM. And as many of you will be aware, capturing students' attention is one of the key parts of sort of a lesson, right? Getting them engaged, hopefully to improve learning. Guys, it doesn't take much to do that. Also, we found a scientist in the community, around where these schools were located, or, scientists within networks that I belong to or colleagues belong to. They want to give back, right? It's almost as if the normal routines it's not enough, which is understandable because you work in science and you become so used to all this awe and wonderment, like any opportunity to excite young students about it is always great and welcome. Now, the last thing we also learned was there was a need to contextualize activities. Now, here's what I mean. We had some activities that the students could not engage with much. yes, it was exciting. Yes, it had science principles to it, but always trying to connect it to something that they could easily, relate to, we found became important. Beyond that, we also found that if the scientists or the resource persons that we brought in were people that either worked in the area or worked in a field that they could better relate and connect to, it seemed like the session ended up really well, right? It seemed like they were more engaged. It seemed like there was more questions, there was more excitement, okay? So that idea of contextualization, now I'm emphasizing on that because, that's what we want to look at here, about that community engagement, because then if we take away the relatability of it, yeah, we may still get successes just based on the excitement of STEM on its own, but then you can enhance and increase the successes by this contextualization a little bit more. So bear that in mind, because that fed a little bit into how we ran one of our key projects at the junior high school level. This SHAPE project, where the SHAPE was an acronym for Shaping Healthy Attitudes and Protecting the Environment, right? So SHAPE. Now, what this was, it was a team-based project learning competition, right? And it was between different schools, right? So we worked with 16 schools on this, and they each had to come up with, they had to identify a health condition, right? And there were some caveats to it. This health condition had to be one that, had like an environmental trigger to it. So you think of malaria, it's caused by mosquitoes, but then the mosquitoes are due to, a lot of stagnant waters around. You think of maybe cholera, and it's due to, of course, poor hygiene practices. And things along those lines. So condition, that's some way you can relate it to environment, all right? And then they had to research into it and propose solutions to this in their teams. So for anyone on here who's familiar with the idea of project-based learning, you see that it follows that approach very well, where, identify projects that the students themselves sort of like brainstorm and come up with it, and then work through it over a long period of time. In this case, they had about a year to work. Now, this is good. This is one of the great successes I've had as far as community engagement is with students, because students did some really impressive things with their work. And we learned some key lessons from it, all right, which I think some of you here will really benefit from. So first, it was like, project-based learning works. You read about it in theory, you watch a few videos about it, and then you try it out and you realize, wow, okay, so yeah, there is something to this. And we say, for us, or for me specifically, this was a great learning because we saw over the course of the year how the students grew. They grew in confidence, they grew in ideation, they grew in the ability to express themselves. But then, they started bringing in the science, right? The science that we were learning in the classrooms. You started seeing and hearing about it more in the meetings that we had with them. Now, the second point I've put on here is that students are a great way to motivate members of the community. And here's why I say that. For one of the teams, their project was looking at waste management practices, basically. And as part of that, they actually put on a drama skit, right? And they had the opportunity to, do a sort of like showcase this. And it had people in the community come and watch, right? We had another team who, they actually did what we would normally consider a pure research project, and they did a whole poster presentation and all of that. And amazingly, we had people other than parents turn up at the day they exhibited this work, right? So, and the last team actually even organized a cleanup campaign around their project. And they were able to get members in the community to come and join them for this cleanup, and even had, people offer to provide refreshments for the students and the people who turned up to engage in the cleanup afterwards, right? Now, what this made us realize was that having these students at the center of the work was able to draw other people in. And it makes really great sense, because if you see young ones doing things that is new and exciting, and you are given the opportunity to contribute to it, many people will take that opportunity. They will take the opportunity to be a part of it, right? They'll take the opportunity to be a part of the student story. They'll take the opportunity to just be a part of the successes of the project. And this is great news for us as far as wanting to engage the community. All right. Now, the last thing that we learned from this project was that, if you're going to run a long-term project, and if you're thinking about STEM projects, it can be very short-term, where it's just a series of demonstrations and a series of activities, right? Or it could be long-term, taking a whole project-based learning approach. If you take that approach, it's very important to have teachers at the school buy into it. And there are a number of reasons for this. One being, they can, if you need after school time, the teachers can make sure you get it. If you need them to connect their homework assignments and things to the projects that you were doing, the teachers can make this happen. And then, of course, if the teachers are aware of what is happening extracurricular-wise outside the school hours, right, they can then piggyback off that in their own lessons and their own time with the students. And we found that where we had very strong teacher supports, those students excel the most. Their projects actually won the competition at the end of the day. So it brings us to that concept of being mindful of the other stakeholders who are involved, right? So we can do STEM education in isolation. We can take the students and just think of them as hours to engage with during the extracurricular time, or we can bring in all the other stakeholders, including teachers, including members of the community, who many are more than willing to support, because, of course, investing in children, there's something about investing in children that's a real draw to most people. Okay, so that's that at the junior high level. Now, we're going to go a bit outside of that and stretch it to look at the community-wide work, all right? Community-wide work, then we're thinking of, okay, work that isn't, taking STEM education that isn't necessarily focused on those that are specifically in school. And I'm emphasizing this point because if you remember right at the beginning, when we looked at the definition for science communication, it wasn't just for people who are in school, right? So do we say if there's a student who maybe is a school dropout because they're not in school, they're not engaged in our STEM education programs? No, we wouldn't, right? And it's the same thing. So I'm going to share with you some of the practices from the engagements that we've done with people who aren't necessarily within the educational system, and what some of these lessons have come out of that. So we've run different activities with just people in the public space, right? For this picture in particular, and I'll come to something else very similar to it later, but this picture in particular was quite impressive. Impressive because we were set up at the Accra Mall, one of our engagement activities, taking science out to the people, sort of thing. and running various sort of like science demonstrations and practicals for anyone who would come along and was interested. And as you can see, that's a full-fledged officer of the law, a police officer who was also interested in what we're doing. Now, you're thinking, well, what business does this policeman have with STEM education? Well, it's for everyone, isn't it? If we can really embed STEM activities and STEM education within the community, then that means it's not just our students who will be benefiting from it, but the scientific literacy of everyone else who, you know, comes across the way will be raised a little bit more, okay? And that was very interesting to see. Then, of course, there are all these public forums and just creating spaces. We're talking about exhibitions where people can just come in and engage with STEM in very informal settings. We're talking about open days where people can come in again and engage with scientists, talk to them, find out about their daily work lives, and just really raise the overall scientific literacy. And the lessons that we've taken from all of it, and these are the three on the side I want to share with you. The first, that to rethink the idea of community, okay? So typically when we have thought of community, we'd have thought about the physical community, the neighborhood, those within a certain radius of where we find ourselves. But then, you know, if you're thinking about community beyond that physical definition, then you can now stretch the idea a little bit more, right? It could be the community where you spend your Saturday free times, right? Your sporting community, your church community, your alumni communities, all right? You can start stretching the idea of community in any number of different ways, okay? And depending on how you stretch it, each of these will have its benefits one way or the other. So, for example, in trying to garner stakeholder support for any of our STEM education projects, you wouldn't necessarily only look at your neighborhood community, because then you look at, you know, which people of influence can I get to support this project and get their buy-in, right? So that idea of community now becomes a very flexible concept, which you can mold around depending on where you find yourself and what you're doing. Now, the second learning point was that, you know, everyone can benefit from a degree of STEM education, like I said with the police officer, right? If you were to spend, let's say, 30 minutes reading the Wikipedia page on sickle cell, for example, right? You'd read a lot about sickle cell, you read about the AAAS, SC, the different types of it, benefits, downsides, you know, you'd learn quite a bit. But by the time you finish doing that now, you're probably more knowledgeable about sickle cell than many others around you, okay? So that knowledge that you have gained is something that if you were to share, will be in a position where it can benefit many other people, right? And this is just beyond those who are in your physical neighborhood community. However, that being said, that is no substitute for if you were to get a microscope and look under the microscope and see how a normal red blood cell looks like in comparison to a red blood cell from someone who's a full-blown sickle cell patient, okay, with an SS genotype, for example. So there's really no substitute for experience. Okay. Now, this is the most key thing I personally think, because if we're going to do STEM education and we're going to embed it in our communities, and we need the support from the people around to be able to make things happen, all right, they need to experience for themselves why this is important. you personally would have had an experience to make you think it's important to get a certain level of scientific literacy and just leveling up, okay? But the parents that we are trying to convince, the assemblymen, all right, the opinion leaders that you're trying to convince, they don't have that experience that you had, which brought you to the position where, for example, you enjoy volunteering, you enjoy giving back, you enjoy supporting students. So we think about, well, if we agree that there's no substitute for experience, then how can we give them the experience that will lead to that same sort of benefits that we really want to have? And this is why it's critical to think beyond just the STEM education as for students, for pupils, but then for a wider, more flexible definition of community, so that it has that overreaching advantage of raising everyone's scientific literacy altogether. Okay, so we're almost there now. And this is the last but one slide. And I bring this here to try and get you to think about how pretty much everything I've said in the last 20 minutes or so is well connected to things I believe you are already aware of and you know. And here's what I mean. When we designed all these projects that I've spoken to you about, one of the foundations of what we do as part of science communication is to focus on three things, all right? For every project, at the heart of it was, well, the goal. What are we trying to achieve, okay? So in the ones where we went out into public spaces, we went to go and do wonderment. Just get people to see something and say, wow, that's great, that was the goal, okay? Other times, if it's student engagement, it may be to specifically get them to learn something new or get them to appreciate what careers in STEM could be like, all right? There's always a clear goal. Now, of this goal, also very tied to the audience. So you wouldn't necessarily go into primary school and then your goal is to get them to know how to use a microscope, all right? It's a little bit, it's a little bit above them. And it may not have the sort of impact that you would ideally be most effective, okay? And then the last part of what always underlines our sort of like engagement, scientific communication engagement, is then the content. Now that we know what our goal is and we know who our audience is, we then think, okay, how can we then achieve our goal, knowing where the starting point is for our audience? So that's the content there. Now, the reason I say these principles cut across, and you're probably very familiar with it, is that for anyone who plays around in the education space, one way or the other, these are things you always have to consider. Where are your students when you are engaging with them? So in the community spaces, for example, that you have at EduSpots, when students are coming in and you're engaging with them, you always have to think, what is their starting point, right? And that's sort of like the audience code right there, isn't it? Where are they in the grand scheme of things, in the ladder of, what we're trying to achieve? Where are they? Because knowing where they are will determine what sort of programs you can roll out for them, okay? What sort of activities that they can engage in, okay? And then there's also that, well, where's the end goal? What's the end point? Are we just trying to increase literacy, or is it specifically scientific literacy? Are we just trying to increase their confidence so that they can put themselves out there more? Or do we just want to give them a vision, a very large, blow your mind out of this world type of vision to then aspire to? Because these things will determine how a lot of educational programs are designed. They'll determine how a lot of interventions are designed. So it's very similar to things that you may already be familiar with. So that if you haven't necessarily been actively engaging in STEM, or you think when it comes to STEM education, that may be a little bit strange to you compared to any other form of education. Well, it's not really true. All that we're now playing around with is the content. Okay. All the other principles remain the same. It's just the contents that now, there's a bit of a significant change, I should say. Okay. So on that note, this is the bottom line, all right? In all the stories that I have seen, so we've been doing geoscientific since 2015. Myself, I've been, in this space when I was doing my PhD, and even since then. So a good number of years now. And all the people that I've worked with across countries, across projects, really, it just becomes clearer and clearer that if you really want to take STEM education, take science at its core, what it is, and make that available to people who aren't necessarily at the heart of science. It's important to have people in the scientific community to be part of that process, right? And when they are part of that process, it's always such a good outcome, all right? Good things always happen if you get people in the science community to engage with those who are outside of it. So if you're thinking of potential programs, if you're thinking of potential opportunities and ideas to be able to just level up the STEM education or the scientific literacy of the people in the spaces that you work in, not just in the neighborhood spaces, but like we said, that flexible idea of community spaces, then using people in the scientific community as resources is one of the bestest ways to go. And a number of different ways that that can be achieved. And I'd love for us to, talk a bit more about that. So that's me. I hope that was clear enough just to share some ideas and really to get you start thinking a little bit about possibilities. And I'm happy to take some questions now.
Amazing. So please, if we all have questions, we can now ask. It's either you put it in the chat section or you raise your hands virtually and then we call you to unmute and then ask your question. Dr. Thomas Tagoe, please, my question is, what do you think are some of the benefits of communicating science to non-science audience?
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yes, Nana, sorry.
Yeah.
I believe Dr. Thomas Tagoe has some.
Again. So, yeah.
Okay, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, yes.
Amazing.
Okay. Okay.
I know, I started giving such a great answer and I was on mute. So, yeah, benefits of communicating science to non-scientific audience. I think the first one is that, of course, it raises overall scientific literacy. What I mean by that is everyone gets to appreciate some parts of science a little bit better. So if you've, let's say, if you've done SHS chemistry, okay, you know a little bit about elements, you know about compounds, you know about equations, and you haven't done your university level, but at least you still have an idea that there are certain elements and compounds that probably shouldn't be mixed together because there may be a potential to have weird reactions. You don't even need to know exactly what they are. You just know this is a possibility. So because you know this is a possibility, if you were to see someone mixing certain medications, a red flag will go up in your mind immediately because you're thinking, I don't know exactly what are in these medications, but I know there's a potential that they could be reacting with each other and it could be problematic. Someone who hasn't done chemistry at the SHS level wouldn't have been exposed to that sort of information. So they'll go and take medication A, and then they'll go and drink some alcohol afterwards. And then when the medication doesn't work or there's a negative side effect, they think there's a problem. However, if there'd been any science communication work or any project that exposed them to the reality of some of these strange things that can happen when elements and compounds are mixed, then even such a person who hasn't done SHS chemistry may also be aware of this possibility and adjust their behavior accordingly, right? So that is one of the key benefits, I think, because it raises everyone's baseline understanding and appreciation of science that little bit more. And it may then just lead to everyone asking for governments to increase funding for scientific research. And hey, that would be a win for everyone within the space. So yeah.
Thank you very much for the answer. I hope, Fad, you're satisfied.
Very, very satisfied. Thank you very much, Doc.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah. Is that Gertrude?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I was going to give you about 5 minutes to ask all the questions as a STEM coordinator for EduSpots. So take it over. Until you are done, nobody asks any questions. So ask all the questions you have.
Okay, thank you. My first question is actually, let's say, a follow-up on what Fad asked. For EduSpots, we have a lot of communities who are interested in running STEM clubs, but unfortunately, some of the communities do not have experienced STEM lead. So I wanted to ask, how does someone with little or no STEM background become a better STEM lead? We actually had a conversation around this last week. I wanted to hear your take on that.
All right, okay. So this may come from a bit of a biased position. I say it may come from a bit of a biased position because I think, yeah, STEM isn't that hard. So that's where the bias comes from. But then when you say, well, how can someone who doesn't have a strong STEM background become a STEM lead? Well, what that STEM lead is trying to achieve is to get people who don't have a strong STEM background to also become conversant with STEM. So in other words, you are going to have to achieve in yourself what you are hoping to start achieving in other people. And I think that's a great starting point. It's a great starting point because then when you are able to achieve it, it gives you experiential learning, which then makes it easier for you to translate that to the people in the spaces that you are working with. So now let's come to, well, how do you then achieve it so that you can have that experiential learning to achieve it in others? And I'll say being very targeted. So there are resources out there for simplistic type learning. For example, the Practical Education Network, they recently put out a training manual for science-like activities to be able to do very simplistic science activities using everyday materials and things like that. So if you have the commitment and say, hey, I need to be the STEM lead in one of these EduSpots, so let me take this activities book, commit to spend, let's say, the next month to at least become conversant with maybe 3 or 4 activities in it, right? Then you've already put yourself in a position where you can lead others on the same path. So whereas in my case, if we were to take the academic ladder and we say nursery is 0 and PhD is 70, I'm intentionally not saying 100 because you finish your PhD and you realize you have such a much longer way to go. But let's say nursery is 0 and PhD is 70. That means you are, if the most science background you have is BEC, you could probably be 20 along the ladder, right? But the more you expose yourself to, the further along the ladder you go. You don't need to get to 50 and 80 and 70 before you can take someone who is at 10 on the ladder to an 11, a 12, a 20, all right? So as you are growing along your journey, you can then pull others along with you. The little, problem you're going to have then is that you'll have to control the space a little bit more. What I mean by that is you can't be allowing them to be doing activities that you have no idea at all about, right? At least whatever activities, whatever projects that you're engaging in should be something that you have already covered a little bit so that you are not completely as oblivious as the students and the community members you are engaging are. But just know that it will also have to be a learning journey for you also.
Okay, thank you very much.
Do you have any more?
Yes, please.
Jeffrey apparently has a lot, right?
Yeah, so my second question is about We Go Innovate. Yes, We Go Innovate Ghana. I know GH Scientific is a partner, correct?
Yeah,
so there's a part of it where I know it's something that has to do with it's tagged knowing it. And I think, yes. So I wanted to know in that regard or in that section, you talk about limitation and myths that we put on ourselves. So I want to know if there are some limitations or myths that we put on the student when we introduce them to STEM or even taking them through STEM experiments. And I ask this question because I developed the STEM monthly challenge, and sometimes I can be working on like an idea or a code, and then I'll feel like maybe it's too, I don't know, it's like I'm making assumptions too much. So I just want to be sure that sometimes I'm not limiting or going beyond the level I should be like it. Yes.
Okay, all right, so let me see, we sort of, if I can get a question you're asking is, in designing programs and activities for young learners and students, do we limit them or are we prone to limiting them? Is that a question?
Yes.
Okay, all right. The simple answer is yes. Yes, we are. The slightly longer answer is it's normal. I say it's normal because we are coming from a place of our experience and our knowledge. There's no way to go about it, right? You can only act and think and behave based on what you know and you've experienced, okay? So you can, even when you try and adjust for and compensate for where you believe these students will be, it will be based on your knowledge and experience of what students, their age range and capacity can do and are capable of. So for this reason, best practices will determine that after designing your activity or your program, you test it. If you have a younger sibling, a younger niece or something, you test it with them. Then based on their response, that can then adjust your approach a little bit. So yeah, there's no way around it. You would have to then test it once or twice and then just continue like iterating it. So if let's say this year when you run it, or let me use this as an example. When I do practical activities as part of the lectures that I give, the approach changes on a year-by-year basis, because I remember that when I did it this way last year, it looked like half the people in the room didn't get it. So let's try introducing it in a slightly different way. And it continues reiterating, so on and so forth. So the only way around it, I can say to you, is you design it to the best of your knowledge and experience, and then you test it on someone who is typical of your target audience. And then you just execute it. You don't expect 100% success on the first run. And then on every run from there, you just iterate and iterate and iterate until you get to a point that you are satisfied with it. Not necessarily a point of perfection, a point where you are satisfied with it, and then you go from there.
Okay, thank you. I think my last question would just be any general tips for someone that leads them.
Any general tips for someone that's new to them? Watch a lot of TED videos. Watch a lot of, there are a lot of TED videos on various, and I don't mean the TED Talk ones, the TED ones are like these very short animated videos on various common science things, all right, about viruses and bacteria, about the history of medicine, about, you know, the first vaccine that was ever created, about what happens if a certain part of the brain is removed. They are very weird and very random things that have been well captured and animated. And I think this is great because it'll give you ideas. It'll give you ideas about things that you can potentially do with students that can be very relatable, because some of these things are so random, but also very relatable and exciting. So I'll say, yeah, watch a lot of TED videos, and just accept that you are also going on an experiential learning journey. So that's okay. And you will have to bring your students along with you somewhere along the line.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
So, thank you. Gertrude, are you okay?
Yes, please, I'm okay.
Okay. So, Doc, I have a question. I have a little girl at home, and Elias, I'll come to you, okay? And she's always like, watch these cartoons, and I'll be a scientist she's age 4. I want to be a scientist. And from her school, probably they're not giving them avenues to develop this interest. So as a parent at home, or somebody who wants to nurture any kid of such nature, what advice do you have for them?
You know, as you're saying that now, I'm wondering if I have a 3-year-old boy at home, and I'm wondering, like, he doesn't say he wants to be a scientist. I guess I'm not doing something right. So I probably need to pick something from you. But you see, for young ones that age, so for the first, let's say, 7 years of life, there's a lot of flexibility in their approach to things, right? And how you should look at it is beyond, you know, what is it they are doing at school, and really approach it from a very play angle. Okay, so very simple things like mixing colors, which to you did this back in primary school, and you don't see what's so exciting about taking something blue and mixing it with a different color and end up with a different, you don't see what's exciting about it. But to such a young mind, they've just created something new that is exciting. So I would say activities, play, very simple things. How many times can you make this ball bounce before it stops? Can you make this coin spin? You know, you just play. I think play is the best form of learning. It's what we try to do with students in school. We try to get them to learn to play. So if they are at that age where they want to play anyway, then play. But maybe you should get her a lab coat so she feels she's being a scientist as she's playing. Then that works really well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think I'm
All right.
insightful. Thank you. Yeah, before we go on, yes, I'll come to you. Kat has excused herself for another equally important assignment. So she's not with us currently. So Doc, she said I should inform you and pardon her.
Sure, that's fine.
Really would have loved to be here. Yeah. So Elias, can you ask your question? Please, let's keep the questions coming. That is all for us this evening, so we can know how to help mentor the next generation, especially those of us with various sports. Thank you. So Elias, can you ask your question?
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. Good evening, everyone. So great to be back to the EduSpots community. Hi, Tom. Nice to.
Hi, Ali.
The opportunity to hear from you once again. Yeah, my question borders on impact measurement, right? So it's very seeing get engaged and sessions and express the next session. But then how do I convince myself that I've not just had a nice time for myself and had the kids also have a nice time. As much impact as I do, and I'm asking this because sometimes you're quite disappointed about the. Yes, hello.
No, go ahead, please. Your line was tripping, so we were not able to hear some of your lines. But I think we are getting the concept. So I'm sure Doc will attend to you. Please
yeah.
go ahead.
Let me see if I can. Let me just see if I got a question. So really, it's how can you know you are making impact, right? Is that like the heart of the question?
Yeah. Hello. Sorry, my network got bad, and I got locked out. Yes, Tom, you did get my question right. It borders on impact measurement and how I'm able to really convince myself that the impact is sustained, especially when you do not have the financial muscle to sustain it for a long enough time.
Right. I mean, that's a very important question. How can you know that what you are doing is serving its purpose? I'll start from saying, well, what was the goal? Right? What was the goal? Which is why a lot of times it's very important to, predetermine what is my goal even before you begin. For example, if the goal was just to wow people with science, then you know there and there whether you've achieved it or not, based on whether anybody said wow, right? If anybody said wow, then you know you've achieved your goals. Great, you can go and sleep and be happy. However, if your goal was something longer term, get more students into science careers, raise scientific literacy, get them to appreciate STEM better, then that's you having to monitor and track over a longer period of time. And like you said, if you finances are a bit problematic, then the options available to you are restricted. However, here's what I will say. Based on your goal, there can be a very simplistic way to try and get an idea if you at least are heading in that direction of achieving it. For example, if what you wanted to do was to get more students to pursue science-based careers. The simple thing most people do is, after this session, find out if, do a whole before and after thing, right? Find out if they are more inclined to science careers than they were before in their session. But that doesn't take into account, what real life throws at them. Like if they finish their BC and they go into science school, things may happen so that even though they have the design, they have the intellectual ability, they were not able to pursue science subjects and as a consequence, couldn't pursue a science degree. That is outside of your control, all right? But what I can then say is potentially, if every student you engage with, you create a database of them and commit yourself to checking up on them even on a yearly basis, right? I know when you were at TFG, you about community engagement and sort of being with the stakeholders, but something as simple as being with them on a yearly basis, checking in on them on a yearly basis, could give you a sense of, well, is your work having some longevity? And this is something that people struggle with beyond what we are doing here. We're even talking larger international organizations. So for example, when my profile was being read, it said something about the International Brain Research Organization. And they provide support for scientists at multiple stages of their career. We're talking postgraduate students and then graduates and early career scientists and so on and so forth. But it's always been hard to, for example, assess if the support you gave to an MPhil student, has that MPhil student now gone on to do a PhD? Have they now, after finishing their PhD, gone to set on